Was there a nuclear war in the past that has been covered up? I believe so, and the evidence shows it. If we look back into history, we see something very odd. Almost all big cities in America had a devastating fire that destroyed most of the city. Here are some of them. The Great Boston Fire of 1872. Then we have the Great Seattle Fire of 1889. Then the Great Toronto Fire of 1904. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871. The Great Portland, Maine Fire of 1866. The Great Baltimore Fire of 1904. And the Jacksonville, Florida Fire of 1901. And the Great Chelsea, Massachusetts Fire, 1908. There are more cities, but let's go on. What is questionable about these fires to me is that it would be beyond coincidence that almost all of the big cities in America would have all had a great fire in the 1800s and early 1900s. Also, the pictures do not show charred remains, but rubble of brick and stone buildings. Brick and stone buildings do not burn. That is why fireplaces are made out of brick and stone. What the historical photos show of these cities is the same type of destruction we see in the photos of the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki after the United States dropped the atomic bomb on them in 1945. Compare a picture of Boston after the supposed fire of 1872 with a picture of Hiroshima after the atomic bomb was dropped on it in 1945. Also compare a picture of Baltimore after the supposed fire of 1904 with a picture of Nagasaki, Japan after the atomic bomb. What do we see? The same type of destruction. But you might say is that no nuclear war is recorded in history. You might be right. But there is a time in history of great wars, destruction, and perplexity. The Great War of 1812. History teaches that the Shawnee Indian chief Tecumseh led a great army against the United States, which was called the Indian Coalition. Tecumseh military forces were also allied with British military forces against the United States in a big and bloody war. Also during this time, big earthquakes were happening in North America called the New Madrid earthquakes. It is reported that over 2,000 earthquakes happened between December 1811 and March of 1812. These earthquakes were so powerful that it is reported that for a time, the Mississippi River flowed backwards from the shaking of these powerful earthquakes. But as bad as things were in North America, they were equally as bad overseas in Europe, where the great Napoleonic Wars were raging. Almost all the countries in Europe were engaged in this giant war, including Iran and the Ottoman Empire. History says that every part of Europe was affected by this great war. During this time of war and earthquakes, a giant comet could be seen in the sky with the naked eye. It was known as the Great Comet of 1811. It was also known as Napoleon's Comet in Europe and Tecumseh's Comet in America. But by 1815, history says that the war in Europe and America had ended. Also, the Great Madrid earthquakes had stopped, and the Great Comet was gone. But then another great disaster in 1816 hit America and Europe, and that was the year without a summer, where temperatures plummeted, which caused massive crop failures and livestock die-offs, which caused huge famine in North America and Europe, which killed millions of people. History claims the year without a summer was caused by a volcano, but I highly question that. I've always been told that after a nuclear war, a nuclear winter follows. I believe the volcano is just a cover story. After the 1816 year without a summer, we see something very odd happen, and that is a huge abundance of wildlife in America. It is reported that huge herds of bison roam the plains of America. It is estimated that 50 to 60 million bison lived on the continent, and market hunters killed millions of them for their hides and meat. By 1889, due to overhunting and bovine diseases, the bison numbers had plummeted to only 541 animals. But it is not only bison that we see incredibly abundant in the 1800s, but also passenger pigeons. It is estimated that 3 to 5 billion passenger pigeons lived in America and that they flew in huge flocks of millions. These flocks were said to have blackened the skies, and sometimes took 3 days for a flock to pass over an area. In the 1800s, passenger pigeons were the most numerous bird species on Earth. But according to the mainstream narrative, due to overhunting and habitat loss, the passenger pigeon went extinct. A bird species that once numbered in the billions went to a population of 0. Amazing. The last known passenger pigeon, named Martha, named after Martha Washington, died in a Cincinnati zoo on September 1st, 1914. Also in the 1800s, there was a great abundance of waterfowl. It is estimated that there were over 500 million ducks and geese in America in the 1800s. Market hunters reportedly killed millions of them every year to sell in the markets in the cities. It is reported that on average day that one market hunter could kill about 200 ducks, and they would put the ducks in barrels and ship them on trains to the markets, where thousands would be sold. There were so many ducks at the markets that it is reported that farmers would buy hundreds of pounds of ducks for livestock feed for the hogs. Also, it is reported that market hunters also killed thousands of deer and elk to sell in the markets. By the 1900s, the wildlife population in America was drastically reduced to the market hunting. In 1918, the Migratory Bird Treaty Law was passed that outlawed market hunting in America. Today, if someone wants to hunt almost any kind of animal, that person is highly regulated with seasons and limits and rules. A lot different than the hunter in the 1800s who had apparently no regulations or limits of any kind. But this is what is questionable to me. Over 100 years of conservation efforts in America of limiting hunting and habitat restoration, the wildlife in America never rebounded even close to the abundance it once was. The question is why? I believe the reason is, after a big nuclear war and a nuclear winter, the radiation of the fallout rejuvenates the land, and that is why we saw such an abundance of wildlife in the 1800s. But if we're going to question the mainstream narrative on this, then we also must question the narrative of the fathers of the country. A lot of countries have a man or several men called the fathers of the country. Why the title as father of that country? In the United States, there are 7 men called the fathers of the country. They are George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and James Monroe. What is very odd and questionable to me about this is why the title as father. Also in early America, these men seem to be highly revered and honored by the people of the 1800s, naming towns and states after them. Also, statues and paintings of the fathers are in town squares and public buildings, and even the picture of some of the fathers are on the money. Why were these men so revered and honored? I think the Bible gives us a big clue to as why. If we read Isaiah 4:1, it states, "In that day there will be so few men left that 7 women will fight for each man, saying, 'Let us all marry you. We'll provide our own food and clothing. Only let us take your name so we won't be mocked as old maids.'" I believe the reason their title as father is because they were the actual fathers and grandfathers of most of the people of America after the Great Nuclear War of 1812. And our real history is a lot different than the history we have been taught. Anyway, thanks for watching my video and have a good day.